Have you ever had one of those now what moments? Right? Those moments where suddenly the context changed, you found yourself in a place that was new, and you didn't know what to do. One of those now what moments. I think of the movie Finding Nemo, Disney animated classic movie about this little clownfish who gets lost and his dad goes looking for him. And along the way, Nemo finds a bunch of friends who can help him along on his journey. And at one point, Nemo gets caught and he ends up in the aquarium of a dentist. And then these friends, these other fish, they help Nemo escape. And right at the end of the movie, it's almost like an epilogue to the story. The fish that he met in that aquarium, his friends, they themselves escaped captivity from the aquarium on this daring adventure. They cross a busy, dangerous highway. They escape from the third floor of an office building, and they return. They end up in the ocean. And there's this moment where they're all celebrating in the ocean, and they're all celebrating in the ocean, and they say, now what? It's like they went from the safety and security of their aquarium to the wide open, vast ocean, and they think to themselves, now what? By the way, if I were a fish, I'd definitely be an angelfish. I think Father Simon, he's a blowfish. Maybe a clownfish? I don't know. Maybe. Hey, what do you think? Is he a blowfish or a clownfish? I want you to type into the comments if you think he's a blowfish or a clownfish, what fish he would be. I want to see that in the digital. I want to see the outcome of that poll in the digital foyer after Mass. So I think for many of us, we've had a series of these now what moments as things have changed so fast and we found ourselves in various places where we didn't know what to do. I think of for ourselves as parish at St. Benedict, on March 15th, we had a big now what moment because that was the last day we celebrated public Mass. We found ourselves asking the question, now what? Now what? Then a few days later, we got word that we had to lock the church doors because we couldn't gather more than 5 people at a time, and we found ourselves asking the question, now what? Then I think many of us thought that this whole thing would blow over in a matter of weeks, and we'd maybe be back to church by Easter, and then that didn't happen. And we asked ourselves, well, now what? I think many of us have been experiencing these now what moments, and we've had to find ourselves adjusting to sort of a new normal. One of the ways I've been trying to adjust and recognizing like, okay, well, things are different now, and I guess I need to buy a mask, right? Something I never thought I'd say like 6 months ago. So I've been shopping. I've been looking for the perfect mask that would match my black clerical attire. And I think I finally found one. This is me wearing it here. But I think many of us have been experiencing the adjustment to this new reality. Now what? Now what? Now what? And I think like many of us have felt like those fish who were suddenly removed from the safety and security of that aquarium and found themselves in a vast, open, uncertain ocean. Now, I think in those moments, in these now what moments in which we often find ourselves, we need to return to the question, what's our main thing? What keeps us focused in moving in the right direction? What keeps us focused? Where are we going? What's our main thing? Last week, Father Simon, he talked about Stephen Covey. He quoted him. He said, the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. And so what's your main thing? In times of uncertainty and ambiguity, where do you turn for direction? For us at St. Benedict, we've had to turn time and time again in this time back to our main thing. We've had to revisit that over and over again. And our main thing comes to us from Jesus. And we see it in the gospel today. And if you find yourself asking the question, now what? Maybe Jesus can help you too. And so the disciples that we read in the gospel, they had this big now what moment. That big now what moment happened for them on the feast, on the day Jesus ascended into heaven. We celebrate this, what the church calls the Feast of the Ascension. It's the day Jesus leaves them. He rises up to heaven in glory and leaves them behind. And it's this epic mountaintop moment where Jesus, he brings them up on the mountain. The person who once was dead but now lives forever, who they saw died and crucified, has resurrected from the dead, and he's standing before them and he's been glorified. And it's this moment, it's kind of like an enthronement, because he's going to rise up to heaven to take his throne, to assume the crown as Lord of heaven and earth. And it reminds me of a scene from the Lord of the Rings. And if you've ever seen it, Return of the King, it's this scene where it's the end of the movie, the enemies, the evil forces have been vanquished, and Aragorn is about to assume the throne. And so he takes everyone up on this mountain in Minas Tirith, and Aragorn assumes the crown of Gondor. So this is him. Look at that. Look at that glorious hair. That's pandemic hair right there. Some of you are starting to look like Aragorn. And so Jesus, he's about to assume the throne of glory. He's about to be crowned king over heaven and earth. And he gives a clear directive. He commissions his followers, his disciples. And he says this. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I have been invested with all power from above. And so go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. Go and make disciples of all nations. Pretty clear directive. He entrusts to them their main thing. He gives them what's called the Great Commission. He commissions them to go forth and to partner with him in the mission of making disciples of all nations. And just after he says this, something happens. Jesus ascends into heaven. He's taken up in glory before their very eyes. And it says while he was going, and they were gazing up towards heaven. They were looking at him, and then suddenly, he's gone. Jesus is gone. Their friend, their mentor, their teacher, their leader, this person they've been following for the last 3 years of their life, this person they've given up everything to follow. And suddenly he's gone. Well, now what? Now what do we do? He's gone. And as they're perhaps thinking that, these two men in dazzling white, they appear, angels, and they said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up toward heaven?" In other words, why are you standing around waiting? Why are you gazing off into the distance? This Jesus, he's coming back. And you've received your marching orders. You know what you're supposed to be doing right now. You've got work to do. You've got places to go. You've got people to see. Go make disciples of all nations. See, sometimes when we forget, when we have these now what moments, we need to be reminded of the main thing. We're like those disciples who didn't know perhaps what to do next. And so they had to be reminded of the main thing. And that's why we're beginning a new preaching series. This is week 1 of our preaching series, Still Sent. And as we enter into this kind of reality, I think many of us perhaps were hunkering down, waiting for this period of pandemic to pass over, and then we could get back to life as normal. But we're realizing more and more that COVID-19 is going to be part of life for the foreseeable future. That we're entering into a new normal, and we have to ask ourselves, now what? Now what do we do? That gathering sizes will continue to be limited for a while. Physical distancing is going to be part of our everyday life. And we need to be reminded that we are still sent on mission, that here at St. Benedict, we exist to form disciples who joyfully live out the mission of Jesus Christ, that even though the context has changed, our mission hasn't changed. Even though we're like those fish in the aquarium who were taken from the aquarium and thrown into the vast open ocean, that we still have work to do. We still have a direction to move in. We still have places to go and people to see and disciples to make. We are still sent. And I want to tell you a little story about somebody who gets this, a member here at St. Benedict, who understands that even in this time, with all the challenges and trials and difficulties, that they're still sent. His name is John Hod. You can see him here. And if you'll notice, that's his forehead right there. That's a classic Zoom move. If you've been in Zoom meetings these days or talking to your family over Zoom, the guy with just the forehead on screen, that's a classic move. So that's John. Now, if you go back to the picture, you'll notice that behind him are hospital curtains. It's really interesting. John was on this Zoom call with a bunch of other St. Benedict members from the hospital. Why was he in the hospital? Well, because back in late April, John had a minor heart attack. Now, you can imagine what that might have felt like for John. The experience of emotions, the uncertainty, the sense of vulnerability, the loss of control, the anxiety. John had surgery, and he found himself recovering in the hospital room. And you can imagine he might have had one of those now what moments. There's nowhere for me to go. There's nothing for me to do. I'm just kind of stuck here. I'm isolated. I'm alone. Now, John was sharing his room with a woman, and he began talking to this woman who was also recovering from something in the hospital. And John began to share his faith with her. He began to share about what God has done in his life, and he was sharing about his church. And as he was sharing, she began to open up. And she began to describe the fact that she had many unanswered questions about God. That she had these things going on in her heart, in her life. You see, this woman, she was searching and she was seeking. And so John, he just did something so simple. All he did was he invited her. He said, hey, why don't you come check out this thing called Alpha? And for you, those of you who don't know what Alpha is, something we offer here at St. Benedict a number of times throughout the year. It's a place where people can ask questions about life and faith with other people who are also seeking and answering and seeking the answers to similar questions. And so he invited her because John knew that he had something that could change her life, that could make a difference. Because in his own life, John has experienced the life-transforming power of Jesus. Now that woman, that night, signed up for Alpha. And 24 hours later, she found herself in the very first all-online alpha that we offered. See, John understood that he was still sent. Still sent. So you may be stuck at home, but you're still sent. You may be vulnerable, but you're still sent. You might be at work, and work is crazier than it's ever been before, but you are still sent. You might be bored. You might be playing video games all day, but you are still sent. You have a mission to play. You have a purpose to fulfill. You're a partner in this work. Say that with me. Say, I'm still sent. I'm still sent. Type that into the comments right now. If you're watching, say, still sent, still sent, still sent, still sent. I'm still sent. And it's never been easier before because people are more hungry and they're more open than they've ever been before. I can think of my own life, family members who are watching us online every Sunday, who haven't stepped into church for years. We have other parishioners who've invited coworkers and friends to watch us online, people that they have never been open to faith before. And it's never been easier to invite somebody to church. Just think about this. Think about it in pre-COVID-19, how difficult it was to invite someone to come to church. You would have had to call them up and either pick them up or tell them to come to Clayton Park, Halifax, Nova Scotia. They would have had to fight the traffic and driven around in circles to find a parking spot in our tiny little parking lot. They would have come and been surrounded by hordes of people that they didn't know. They could have sat next to somebody who had really bad breath. At the sign of peace, shaking hands with that guy who had his really sweaty hands. And we don't know that kind of, and how much a fear there is for somebody who doesn't know what to expect, who's never set foot in a church. And then they have to endure the discomfort of listening to my homily from a hard wooden pew. Now, people can endure the discomfort of my homily from the comfort of their lazy boy, right? They don't have to get all dressed. They don't have to worry about what to wear. They don't have to worry about what people are going to think. They can watch church. They can join us from the safety and security of their own home. And it doesn't have to be that scary. If a guy recovering from a heart attack in a hospital room can invite a total stranger, you can invite somebody that you care about. So I have two things I want to ask you to do today, if you're watching. One, I'd like you to think of somebody and offer a personal invitation to that person. And it can be so simple. It can just be a text message, and it could sound like this. It could be like, hey, in this sort of season that we've been in, I've been going to church on Sunday morning online, and it's really helped me. And I think it might help you too. Here's a link. It might be a phone call. It might be a face-to-face conversation. You can invite anybody in your life, and they don't have to live in Clayton Park, Nova Scotia. They can live on the other side of the world. So just think of somebody and make a personal invitation to somebody you would like to bless in this time. The other thing I'd like you to do is, one way you can invite people to church is just to share on social media. That if you're watching on Facebook right now, it's so easy. You can just hit the share button, and it's like inviting everybody on Facebook right now that you're friends with to watch us on church. And see, for us, it's not a big deal. It's just a little button. It's just a single text message. But for somebody who's searching, for somebody who's hungering, for someone who feels lost and lonely, that little invitation might be the very thing that changes the direction of their life. I was praying recently, and it occurred to me that our children and our grandchildren, not mine, your children and your grandchildren, they're going to look back on this time many years from now, generations from now, a generation or two from now, and they're going to wonder what it was like for us to live through a time of global pandemic. And they're going to ask us what we did. And I don't want to say that I didn't do anything. And I have this image, this vision of a little old grandmother many years from now, and she's sewing a little scarf or something as she rocks back and forth in her zero-gravity rocking chair. And her, teenage grandson takes off his virtual reality helmet, bodysuit thing. And he says, "Grandma, what was it like to live through a global pandemic? What was it like to live through that time of scarcity and fear and anxiety and loneliness? What was it like in the year 2020? And that grandmother, she stops sewing or knitting. She stops rocking, and she looks at her grandson in the eyes, and she says this. This is what she said. She said that 2020 was the best year of my life because it was the year that I encountered the person of Jesus Christ, and that transformed my life forever." And she was able to say that because one of you invited her into that encounter. She was able to say that her life was transformed because one of you extended a simple little invitation that changed the whole direction of her life. I want to look back on this time, and I want to be able to say that we made more disciples than ever before, that we saw more people encounter the love of God than ever before, that we saw more people transformed by the love of Jesus Christ than we ever saw before. And you have a part to play in that. You are part of this mission. And so I say to you, go, make disciples of all nations. Go, extend invitations to the ends of the world and help people encounter the love of Jesus Christ. That's our mission. Will you join us?